Why are you confident that the removal of those irritants, as you identify them, will do the job in attracting back private capital? And I ask because I think back to a time when those things didn't exist, right? Under the previous Harper government, it certainly didn't see, an increase in oil production that was through the roof, or pipelines get built through the roof. Like, there was very specific opposition that existed. Let's just take Northern Gateway, which was this 10 years ago, that ultimately made its way through the courts. The courts agreed that adequate consultation wasn't done. And that, at the time, was what blocked the pipeline from going ahead. Not the existence of a tanker ban, not the existence of C-69, not the existence of the emissions cap. So why are you so certain if those things are removed, the opposition that existed 10 years ago will not provide an impediment this time?
Well, we did have a private proponent 10 years ago. It was Enbridge. We had a proponent of Energy East 10 years ago as well, TC Energy. We also had a private proponent of Keystone XL, TC Energy. But when you layer on bad policy and bad law after one after another, that is what's chased the private capital away. And so if we can get to a point where I think aspirationally the Prime Minister wants to get to, where we can have this workaround on all of those bad laws, which is what the 2-year time horizon is for the Major Projects Office, and at the same time work to repeal or replace the bad laws that to create an overall improvement in the investment climate. We think that's where our interests are going to synchronize. And we think in doing so, the fact that we have so many of the companies that are at the table wanting to advise us from a technical point of view, the fact that we had over 100 executives in the room from different energy companies, that shows to me the enthusiasm to get to a yes. So I believe very strongly that if we can get to a point where this is on the major projects list, there's a commitment to get it approved within a reasonable time frame, that we will be able to attract those dollars back as we've been able to in the past.
So is it your impression from those proponents that they believe if, for example, all those irritants in the form of those laws are removed, that there will be a proponent for this pipeline? Because, again, they will still be up against, for example, coastal First Nations, which just released a press release saying, as the rights and title holders of BC's North and Central Coast and Haida Gwaii, we must inform Premier Smith once again that there is no support from coastal First Nations for a pipeline and oil tankers project in our coastal waters. Like, that opposition doesn't disappear, even if Mark Carney does everything you want him to.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I have a very skilled Indigenous relations minister who's very sensitive to the fact that any major project that goes forward has to have Indigenous ownership as the foundation. That's a bit different than it was 10 years ago, that we're beginning with the conversation about how we can get to a yes. And she began the conversations already on Monday, making a number of phone calls, and she's going to continue doing that. She's already visited Port of Prince Rupert and had a chance to talk with some Indigenous leadership there. So it's a process, and we have to begin with relationship building and make sure that that there's an understanding of the benefits that all of us get, not just Alberta, but all of Canada and the bands in particular. And so we're prepared to do a lot of that hard work. That's what Indigenous consultation and meaningful consultation is all about. And so that's why we got started on it right away.
And I do understand your point about endeavoring to change that. And if it were, 1 or 5 or even 10 First Nations that had expressed some opposition to this, I can envision a path forward. But I think it was 61 First Nations 10 years ago that expressed opposition, so much so that they took it all the way through the courts and ultimately got a decision in their favor. How much taxpayer money are you willing to bet on something like this when the track record is what it is?
Well, I guess I would say that Justin Trudeau was not a fan of pipelines, and yet under his term in office, the Coastal GasLink pipeline got built. The Trans Mountain expansion happened. So it is possible for us to build large linear projects. We have to be able to find a way to do it at much less expense and with much greater benefit to Indigenous communities, as well as much more reliance on private sector money. So it is possible to build these kinds of major projects. And so this is part of the reason why we want to start that conversation now. We want to get to a yes. We want this to be a win for everyone, a win for Alberta, a win for the nations that are impacted, and a win for Canada also. This is going to be ultimately, if it's 1 million barrels a day, a $20 billion annual boost to our GDP. Governments end up benefiting about 40% from that. You can help to meet your NATO commitments at the federal level. It would help us to be able to meet our health and education and infrastructure needs provincially. We have to be able to build these kinds of projects. We've got a $9 trillion value in our bitumen that are beneath our feet in Alberta. We have to be able to get it to market, and this is would be the way that we'd be able to access the new markets in Asia that are very keen to work with us on this. I suppose we could keep on relying on the same market in the United States, working with American partners and sending more of our products south. But that's also a failure of the exercise. The reason why everyone is talking about major projects in the first place is because we've become over-reliant on a single customer, and we need to build new markets. This is what it looks like, is that we've got to work together to make that happen.
And I do understand that point. I guess, TMX has already greatly expanded our share of our ability, I would say, to diversify our markets to the boon of both provincial and federal coffers. My question, though, was about how much taxpayer money at a maximum you're willing to sink in, because it's the type of bet you're making is ultimately contingent on the return for, and you talked about the potential return, right? I remember a time when your predecessor of the same party, Premier Jason Kenney, sunk $1.3 billion into making a bet on Keystone that taxpayers ultimately ended up footing the bill for. So on behalf of those taxpayers, isn't it fair to ask if they're really going to get value for money and how much of their money you're willing to sink into a project that could not get anywhere 10 years ago?
Well, and the NDP sunk $1.3 billion into a oil by rail that didn't work. And the federal government ended up probably overpaying. I'm just letting you know. And the federal government overpaid by probably about $10 billion on building the Trans Mountain Pipeline. This is why we need to create a process that is streamlined, where we bring in private capital. I would look at this as a success by having a private sector proponent come forward. Are you asking me if I have $34 billion kicking around to be able to pay for this? No, I don't. Nor does the federal government. When you look at what the parliamentary budget officer said, when you look at the significant deficit that they're facing, we need to have these kinds of projects built to create wealth, to create government revenue for both our government and the federal government. And we can't keep saying no to everything. We have to find a way to get to yes. We have to find a way to address the legitimate concerns that are being raised. But this has to be a country that builds things again, because otherwise we're all going to face very, very dire situations in our federal budget deficits and our provincial budget deficits. We just can't afford to keep on doing things the way we've done them the past 10 years. We've got to get the private sector back and confident that these are the kind of projects that they can get to the finish line.
Just very quickly, is $14 million the max that your government will invest of taxpayer money?
I hope so. But as I've said, we will
also
not
ruling it out.
Be prepared. Well, I'll tell you why. It's because we have a facility called the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, where we have the ability to underwrite up to $3 billion in loan guarantees so that Indigenous nations are able to take an equity stake. So that gives you an idea of how serious we are about underwriting these kinds of projects. We've already done that with $750 million worth of projects, including pipeline projects, that are going to deliver $1.3 billion worth of revenue to 43 of our 44 nations. So we've already put our money where our mouth is, and we're prepared to do more of that. The federal government also has a similar type of program, and we're hoping to be able to partner with them on that. I think that that's the appropriate way for governments to intervene, is to make sure that Indigenous equity stakes can be purchased and that they can get the long-term benefit from it.
But just to be clear, that's loans? I'm saying, right now you're putting $14 million in to get this process going. Are you going to put $5 billion in to get it built? That's the question.
Well, look, we have to find out what it's going to cost to build. I've been told that it could be anywhere from $20 to $30 billion. And no, Alberta doesn't have the money to build $20 or $30 billion. We need a private sector proponent. The way we get a private sector proponent is we work with the federal government so that there's an answer that's going to be yes at the end of this process. And I am very confident when we get to that point that the private sector will come in. It's going to be up to Prime Minister Carney whether or not he wants to work with us on being able to advance these kinds of projects or not, whether what he campaigned on in being a leader in the G7 and being an energy superpower on conventional and new energy is real. And so we will see. We'll know in pretty short order because I'll be meeting with him and we'll be continuing to do the technical work. And I would hope that the answer is yes.